I guess we're live this morning, and I tell you, it was probably one of the roughest mornings because I stayed up scrolling last night too much. I was on my phone, and just caught me. It got me too much, and it was one of those things where I got to the beach this morning. I was so excited to be able to spend some time with the Lord, get in the Word, and I just could not focus. I don't know if you guys have been in this situation before, but I walked on the beach for a little bit, listened to a little Proverbs. Someone asked me about my routine yesterday, my buddy Dave, and Dave Hamilton, love you. Shout out to you as an inspiration to be able to see you yesterday. He said, what is the kind of routine or in the morning? And what I said was, I'll get up, I'll do some exercises that try and get me to sweat a little bit. I'll walk around the block, which is a mile. I'll drink my water. I'll listen to my Proverbs. Then I come back and I read the Proverbs. And then, so I want to read it all the way through. And then I sit down to annotate it and take the notes to be able to create the podcast. And so I went through all those motions this morning, and it was amazing because on the beach I was cloudy. I really couldn't focus, all these things. And what God just let me know is, like, I'm not in your routine. Like, sometimes I'll show up in the routine, but I'm always in the moment. I'm always in the moment when you're here with me, and don't worry about you doing the ritual or the routine or the religion. Think about just being here with me. So I want to invite every single one of you that if you have your routines or your rituals, sometimes we can get clouded in those, but you'll never be clouded when you take a moment and you spend present time with him. We're doing the corresponding proverb, corresponding day. We haven't recorded in a couple of days, so we're gonna do 3 episodes back to back, and we're starting off with July 2nd. And in this whole series, the next 3 episodes are going to be all about wisdom, which honestly, Proverbs, it's filled up with wisdom. And it is amazing. So the title of today is But First, Wisdom. I heard this story the other day. Actually, I read it. Kendra Hall. I admire you. You're incredible and a phenomenal author. And I was reading her book, and she was talking about that story of But First Coffee. And it was this story that kind of latched onto it, and it was the story that made so much sense. And then people started to use But First, and then yoga, But First, whatever it was. And in my life, what I found was my pops was big with this, is he was always, but first, wisdom. Before you ask anything, before I give you any answer, I always want to direct your eyes to the Lord. That's what my parents would do. They would tell me that they didn't know the answer, but they knew someone who did, and they would always focus my eyes there. And little did I know that they were going to check out early, spend some time in heaven, while most of my life would be without them. But if I first had wisdom, everything else would fall in line. So why don't we get this party started?
Nothing more on my mind. I got 2 shines, so every day I climb. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never known, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.
Little, I remember my pops getting so excited, and he came up to me and he said, "Hey, I want to tell you this story about a guy named Solomon." I was like, well, number one, it's a little bit of a weird name. I'm 10 years old, Dad. This is what I'm thinking. I'm not saying it to him, but I'm like 10 years old. If a kid in my 4th grade right now had the name Solomon, he'd probably get bullied a little bit. People would make fun of his name. It was a different name, all those things. So that's what I was caught up on. And then he says, this man Solomon, God asked him, basically gave him permission to ask God for anything. Like, ask me anything. This was God talking to Solomon. And Solomon, my pops was so excited, and I was thinking, man, like if God asked me, like, you could ask me for anything, or told me you can ask me for anything, man, I was thinking Lamborghini. I was thinking a pool in the backyard. I was thinking of My Pet Monster back in the day. That was my era. I was even thinking just bring me some name brand cereal because we always have the store brand one, Pop, and I'd like the name brand. I don't want the Tostios. I would like the Apple Jacks. You know what I'm saying? Like I'd like the real stuff. Well, this is going through my head, but my pops is just waiting and he's just, anticipating how my excitement. My excitement's not about, this guy named Solomon, but he pulls me close and he says, you know what he asked for, boy? And I was like, what, Pop? And he's like, he asked for wisdom. And then my pops walked away like he had just dropped a bomb on me. And I was thinking, this is the dumbest story I've ever heard in my life. If somebody gave me the keys to the kingdom and told me, like, you can ask for anything, at that time at 10 years old, I would not have asked for wisdom. And so it's incredible, though, because as we jump into Proverbs 2, it starts off with, and the reason why we do this, the corresponding proverb, corresponding day, is 3,000-year-old wisdom and how it could be applicable today. So if this is your first Inchstones, which are little tiny things that you could put in play every single day that create a milestone, I want to thank you for tuning in. Make sure you watch, subscribe, comment, and then share it with all your friends. But we do the corresponding proverb, corresponding day, and this was from July 2nd. So it's Proverbs 2. So it started off with the question of how can I get it? Like this wisdom thing, how can I get wisdom, right? And so in verse 1, it says accept and store up. So the cool thing is I always thought like, wow, I could store this stuff up, but God was telling me you have to first accept it. And for you to accept it, you have to study it, spend a little bit of time with it, and see its credibility. If you don't see its credibility, you won't accept it. If you don't accept it, then you can't store it up. But it calls out right then is just to accept and store up, and that's verse 1. In verse 2, it says to turn your ear and apply your heart. Turn your ear. Be conscious of what you're listening to. Apply your heart to it. What you listen to or what you see or become aware of through the senses ultimately drops down into your heart. And when we take our heart and our heart fills up, then the overflow of our heart is our words. Our words have power, the power of life and death. So how can we apply our heart? It's because we filled it up with something that is great that we heard, right? And we filled it up and then it came out our mouth and we used our words. Our words then became life, and we could either speak life or death. It has the power of both. In verse 3, it says, call out and cry aloud. This one hit me huge because sometimes we call out for something, but we don't cry aloud. My son is big on this where I'll ask him, I'll be like, did you call your sister, or can you get your sister? He's downstairs, and he'll be sitting next to me, and he'll just yell, McKenna. And I'm thinking, I could have done that, son. You called out, but did you cry aloud? Did you go to a place where you know that she would hear you? And that's where, in verse 4 of how can I get it? First, you have to accept and store it up. Second, you have to turn your ear, apply it to your heart. And then you have to call out and cry aloud. And in verse 4, it says, look for it and search for it. There's a difference between looking and searching, and this goes back to my son Maddox also. Sometimes I'll ask him, yo, son, did you check that one thing? We were hanging some pictures the other day, and I needed some nails. And I said, did you go, they're in the garage. I need you to go and look in the toolbox. There's a little case, and it has nails and screws and all the stuff. He comes back, and he said, I couldn't find it, Dad. I said, okay, did you look? He said, yes. I said, did you look in the toolbox? He said, yes. And then he left. And then he came back and he had the nails. And he said, I didn't look well enough in the toolbox. He looked for it at first, didn't find it. But are you searching for it? Did you go in search of it? And in verse 5, it says, then you will understand. So think of this. How can I get wisdom? You have to accept it first. So spend a little bit of time figuring out what the value of wisdom is and where it comes from. Where does wisdom come from? It's from the fear of God. How do we fear God? We just respect him. How can we respect him? By spending time with him, seeing that his word and his action is in line. When a person's word and their action is in line, then you can trust them or you can respect them. And when that happens, that's the beginning of wisdom. So we have to accept it and store it up. We have to turn our ear and apply our heart. We have to call out and cry aloud, look for it and search for it. And in verse 5, it says, then you will understand what wisdom is, right? Because wisdom is like the philosophy part of it. But once you start to understand it, it becomes yours. There's a difference between renting something and owning something. The second question for me with wisdom was, why is it important? So in verse 6, it says, because you'll gain wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding. Imagine if you had wisdom, knowledge, and understanding in every single aspect, or everything that you set out to do. You had wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. I mean, that would be the holy grail. And so it's not just in business, relationships, anywhere like that, but it's in every aspect of life. Seek wisdom, understanding, or wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, and imagine what can happen. And then I started to ask, what are the benefits? What are the benefits of this wisdom thing? Well, in verse 7, it says success and a shield. And imagine having a shield. I used to always think like, force field as a kid when you're playing and you're like, force field, you're playing tag, force field. Imagine if you had a force field. Imagine if you could predestined success in your personal, your professional, your spiritual, and your financial. It doesn't mean you don't hit hardships. It just means your view on those things is successful. Now, some people are like, success, it just has to have a number. No, it doesn't have to have a number to it. Success can be doing exactly what you love at that particular time. I said this to my friend Will yesterday. He was talking about his art, and he's doing his art. And I said, the great thing about art is that it's all, for the artist, it's just about expressing it. And then it's not for you to wonder how people will react to it. And when that happens, magic happens. In verse 8, it guards and protects. In verse 9, what is right, what is just, what is fair, and every good path comes from wisdom. In verse 10, wisdom in your heart and peace in your soul. Imagine if you had wisdom in your heart and you had peace in your soul. Most people would just like the second part of it, and that's in verse 10. In verse 11, it says discretion. That'll stop you from making silly decisions. In verse 12 through 15, it'll save you time, energy, and money. In verse 16 and 19, it'll protect your family. And then the next question for me is once I get wisdom, then what? And in verse 20 through 21, you will be content, you will be peaceful, you will be full of joy. Well, sign me up. And then in verse 22, it's funny because God just ends it with, so don't be silly. Think of this. When we think of wisdom in the first place, right? And now I go back to Solomon. My pop's telling me about Solomon. Here's this guy who God gave him permission to ask for anything, and he would give it to him. He said, ask me for anything, and I'll give it to you. And then Solomon asked for wisdom. At 10 years old, I was like, that's silly. But then I went to this study of like, how could I get wisdom? Well, I have to accept it and store it up. I have to turn my ear and apply my heart. I have to call out and cry aloud. I have to search for it, and I have to look for it and search for it, and then I will understand what it is. And as I started through this process over the last 30 years, the corresponding proverb, corresponding day, I started to see the value of it. But what are the benefits? A success, it'll bring success and a force field or a shield. It'll guard and protect. It'll show you what's right, just, fair, and every good path. It'll give wisdom in your heart and peace in your soul. It'll give you discretion. It'll save you time, energy, money. It'll protect your family. Wow. Well, then when I get it, what do I do? What will happen, or what will happen once that transpires in my life? Well, I'll be content, peaceful, full of joy. And then he ends it with, so don't be silly. Just choose wisdom. And see, as I was 10 years old and I looked at this, I was very confused by what my pop said. But I realized that through all of my travels, trying to find the Holy Grail, trying to find the magic beans, trying to find the silver bullet, those things resided with me my whole entire life if I would just choose wisdom. And so when you start out on your path, when you start out on your journey, whether it be a business, a relationship, anything like that, just think of this. But first, wisdom. I want to thank you for rocking with us on the podcast. I appreciate you. This has been Inchstones. The next episodes next two are going to be about wisdom also and the application of it. So I appreciate you. My name is Kelly Cardenas, and I'm officially off. the hot seat. Peace, love, and soul.
Nothing more on my mind. I got two shines, so every day I climb. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to